It's so much foreshadowing for what he's about to go through. This scene that we're seeing could be happening during these two verses right before, but all the clues kind of point to it being right directly in that time frame. So welcome to the Snipe Life, where we look at creativity through the lens of Christianity, and today we're going to be taking a look at The Chosen season finale, the actual last episode of The Chosen. Now, at this point, most of you have either seen it in theaters, or you just saw it come out on The Chosen YouTube channel, or the app, or something. We're going to talk all about the whole entire episode, but right now we're going to focus on what is a really small but interesting an integral part of this episode, which is the cameo we got from King David and his wife and the choir master and all these different people. So let's take a look at these scenes here. It's the very first scene and the very last scene in this episode. Let's take a look at those and just kind of see where things landed, see who these people are. One of the big questions that I actually have, and I think I might have an answer to, is who is this wife of David? Is this Bathsheba, or is this one of his other wives? We know that he had like about 6 wives or so. That are named in the Bible, and like 19 children or something. So a lot of different activity going on there, let's say that. But let's talk about that a little bit and kind of just dive into this episode. But real quick before we continue, I wanted to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Angel Studios. Of course, this is the amazing platform which helped to distribute The Chosen from the very beginning of the whole thing. And they have many other shows on Angel Studios that you can go check out right now. Whether you want to check out comedy or kids shows or really a ton of other things, you can go check those out for free. It's like the free Christian Netflix in a way. So go download the Angel Studios app with my link in the description down below, and this is a great way to support other Christian media that's emerging right now. In fact, you can even finance future projects of different shows that you're really interested in. For me, that would be Testament. This is a modern day retelling of the book of Acts, done in a style of a UK drama, and I'm really interested in that kind of thing. So I actually backed that project myself. If you find other things that you want to back on Angel Studios, then you can definitely do that by downloading the app down below. All right, let's get back to the video. So we're in 990 BC. It's good to remember. One of the very first things that we notice here is that David is the same actor that we saw earlier on in season 2, which is cool to kind of bring back that same recurring actor that plays this character. Also, he has a wife that's with him, and she's pregnant. So that's kind of important. We got to take a look at that.
Our Lord Most High's anointed, King David and his queen.
My king says.
Rise, please.
This is King David, remember? This is a very big deal in Jewish society during this time, in Israel during this time. This is King David, like the big guy. He's in charge of everything. He has control of everything. He is the king. And so, yes, he is the highest anointed, and he's the one that's put into this place. And you can see the respect that people have for him, the reverence that they have for him, especially in his own courtyard, his own courtroom, I should say, as we get into this.
Jedithan, Asaph, how is the peace coming along?
I think we're close, Your Majesty.
I'll hit a work in progress any day. A work in progress is better than no work at all, and no progress.
I'm looking forward to it as well. But, if I may, where are the harps, lyres, and flutes?
Now, this is actually really interesting. The woman who plays this character, who we're not exactly sure who she is, that she's not named here. Maybe she is in the subtitles, and I'm not sure. But this woman is the wife of one of the brothers for King and Country, which is very, very cool to see that. At least I think she is. I'm pretty sure this is who this is. But she actually came in, and we saw some behind the scenes from her Instagram and some different things that she was going to come in and actually play a character, but we could never nail down exactly what character she was playing. We had some guesses that this might be it, but I'm glad that we get to see her here. She did a great job, obviously. Now, this set as well is a set that we saw a lot in the behind the scenes when we were doing a lot of research for The Chosen, because all the actors and actresses and the crew, everybody wanted to take pictures on these thrones because they thought they were so cool. And so everybody's Instagram was actually filled with these thrones, even though they were trying to keep them secret. A lot of people posted about them. So we talked about this maybe 4 months ago. So, so yeah, actually really funny. We couldn't pinpoint if these were going to be like Jewish thrones until we found out later that King David was going to be in the mix. We thought this might be some Roman stuff or something, but we weren't quite sure because we didn't have enough information about everything. But with all the little pieces added together, we knew it was going to be David, which we talked about in my guesses, my last guesses videos before I watched the episodes. So let's continue on.
But if I may, where are the harps, lyres, and flutes?
That's... well, we were trying something new.
Go on.
This is a psalm of Asaph. He wrote the lyrics, I composed the music. And instead of singing and using instruments, the text will be spoken, accompanied by a low hum from the choir.
The human voice. The most beautiful instrument of all.
So if we remember from scripture, David is an instrumentalist. He's a musician. He loves to play music, and this was something that he was actually pretty proficient in, and King Saul actually asked him to play on certain occasions. So he obviously has a love for music and for poetry. We could tell throughout all of the Old Testament and the places where David appears that he is a creative soul in a lot of ways. You know, he's a lot like me, where he loves to create and he does these different things in order to create. And Solomon, in the same way, is very similar as well, as he creates the temple. He's obviously very intentional about the things that he puts in there and different things that happens with that. And so David here, of course, he would be wanting to listen to music and doing all these things. Now, let's go to the scripture actually where this is from before we dive into the actual psalm. This is from Psalm 77. Now, it says in the top of a lot of these psalms, like who wrote them or who's kind of, you know, who it's kind of coming from. So this is to the choir master, according to Jeduthun, a psalm of Asaph, which is who we just saw, right? These characters are the ones that we just saw in this scene as David is approaching them. He's talking to Asaph, who's the one that's going to be reading the poem there. And so we see these different characters begin to pop up as they're going to start to get into this psalm.
A wonderful idea.
Thank you, sire. My prayer for this psalm is that, like your own songs, it could be a comfort to God's people for generations to come.
This is my prayer also.
May it please the king.
And the king.
Him most of all.
Now, this is an interesting time in David's life. Again, we're not 100% sure who this queen is to kind of nail down what time frame this is in the Bible. The only queen that we really have a lot of information on is Bathsheba. And so if this is Bathsheba and she's pregnant at this moment, it limits us to a certain amount of room, right, within time frame. So obviously it could be later kids that David has, but it also could be that first child that Bathsheba bears for him, which would mean that this is in between the time of killing Uriah and before Nathan actually comes to speak to David. Now, we're going to dive into that a little bit more in a second, but let's kind of continue on and just kind of see where this lands with the psalm overall. I also think it's kind of interesting that David and Asaph here, Asaph is kind of presenting this as a joyful thing, this psalm. But most of the psalm is actually pretty dreary and sad and angry, and it struggles with that, right? Which David does a lot in his own psalms. He struggles with that in-between space of being angry with God or feeling suffering or dealing with different things that the world will throw your way. You know, why do my enemies, we hear a psalm later that actually Shmuel quotes from David, and it says, you know, why do my enemies prevail, basically, while I'm sitting here in sorrow. And so David felt that a lot, and so obviously he's going to resonate with this psalm for sure, but let's continue on.
I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted.
So we can see there, even in the very first lines of this, let's read that again. I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. So it's this moment of I am just crying with everything, all of my being, right? My hands are outstretched. I'm crying out to God. I'm in trouble, but I'm seeking the Lord, right? And so it's really bringing you into that mindset of like, I'm giving everything because of my sorrow, because of my weariness, because of the struggle that I'm in right now. It's just very relatable. I'll say that.
When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. You hold my eyelids open.
And again, it's kind of going back to the same thing. So when I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. My soul refuses to be comforted, right? And again, this is going to play into a lot of what we see in this episode in particular. The whole episode is kind of built on this psalm, as it's the bookends of the entire episode, but also interspersed in between the entire episode as well, in between Simon and Eden and some different things that are going on there. He says, you hold my eyelids open, as if he can't sleep. He's having trouble sleeping. I'm so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old, the years long ago. I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Now, he's not going to do too much more of this psalm here, but we're going to hear a little bit more from it throughout the rest of the episode.
I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old, the years long ago. I said, let me remember my song in the night.
Now this face here, okay, I wanted to stop right here because I want to talk about the theories that we can have in between this time frame of David. So for David in particular, if this is Bathsheba that he's with, right? Which it definitely could be. We're not seeing any other children here, and this could be a time, I mean, it would be most obvious, right, for us to assume that this is Bathsheba. If it's not, then that's cool too, but think about where David would be hearing these words, right? Right when he's in this point, it's so much foreshadowing for what he's about to go through, if this is Bathsheba. So in the story of David and Bathsheba, thank you so much. In the story of David and Bathsheba, if you don't know it, here's what happens. David is the king, right? In Jerusalem, in Israel, in the nation of Israel, right? The king always would go to battle with his army. That's how it goes. You go to battle with them and you win or you lose together, right? That's how it goes. But he decides, for whatever reason, that he is not going to go into war with the rest of his soldiers. He's going to send them off and have them fight, for the nation. And he stays behind. During that time, he sees his best friend's wife naked, bathing on a roof, right? And so he decides, I want her. And so he tells her to come over, and then he sleeps with her. This is his best friend's wife. Uriah is one of his mighty men that traveled with him while he was running away from Saul. Uriah. This is not like some random dude, right? This is one of his best friends that he's traveled with and fought with and done life with for years, right? And yet he steals his wife when he's gone off to war. Now, Uriah comes back from the war, and David tries to get him to sleep with Bathsheba because they found out that Bathsheba is pregnant. And so he's trying to cover up the pregnancy by having her husband sleep with her, but he refuses to. He says, while my brothers are off at war, there's no way that I will do this, basically. He's very honorable. And then David tries to get him drunk, and still he won't do it. And so David ends up killing Uriah. He sends him out to the front lines of battle, and then he sends a letter to the leader of the battle and says, whenever Uriah is in the front, have everybody else pull back, and Uriah will die. And that's exactly what happens. He kills, again, his best friend, one of his best friends. He kills him. And so now, if this is the moment in David's life where that has actually happened, this is the moment in Scripture in between killing Uriah and Nathan coming to him. Let's take a look at that real fast, because I think this is really, really interesting and important for us to kind of go into. So we see here 2 Samuel, right? If we go back a chapter to chapter 11, we see David and Bathsheba, and we're not going to read through all of this right now, but we see at the very end of this, When Uriah's wife had heard about her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. So how much time, sorry, you guys can't even see, right there, how much time has actually passed when we look at these singular verses, right? These two verses right here. How much time has actually passed? We don't know. We know at least 6 or 7, 8 months maybe. Like, there's a long time. But we know that the son was actually born, right? David's son. And that they actually did get married and she became his wife. So there's a long period of time here. So this is basically where this is happening if that character is Bathsheba, right? And so this scene that we're seeing could be happening during these two verses right before Nathan comes to rebuke him, which we've all heard this story, I'm sure, as Nathan tells him a parable and David gets so mad. He's like, that man must be punished. And then Nathan tells him, well, you are that man, you know? And so this may be the David that we're seeing in those few verses where he hasn't yet received his comeuppance, right? He hasn't yet received his consequence, but it's coming very swiftly. And so if that is Bathsheba, Nathan is going to come soon after that child is born, and then that child will actually die, which is another connection maybe to Eden even. So I wonder how they're connecting this, because it's not super clear. They didn't call her Bathsheba or anything like that. We don't see any other children, which we might not have seen during this time of night anyway. But all the clues kind of point to it being right directly in that time frame. So it is quite interesting. And if that's the case, like, David would be really hit hard by this psalm, but not to the extent that he's going to be later on when he's like not eating anything and he's just praying all day, hoping that God will change his mind about killing his son. Yeah, very, very, very crazy. But let's continue on.
Let me meditate in my heart. I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old.
So that's where this beginning part ends here. And we don't see much more in terms of this David part, but we do see at the very end here just a bit more of this section right here.
When the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies gave forth thunder. Your arrows flashed on every side. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind. Your lightnings lighted up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way was through the sea. Your path through the great waters. Yet your footprints were unseen.
Now, obviously, amazing part there. We'll see the very end of that in just a second. But we're actually missing the last line of this psalm for whatever reason. I guess they just decided they wanted to hit this ending point right here. But we're actually missing the last verse here, which is, "You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron." So the Chosen probably just thought that was not a needed verse for this particular use of this for whatever reason, but they do miss out on this. There's also a few other verses that are skipped later on when we watch through, but not a huge deal as always. There's very specific reasons why they're picking these verses to talk about so they can hit these story points as we kind of go through. But amazing section here. I love the humming beneath. It reminds me a lot of Little James in season 1 when he sings that "in a dry and weary land," that part there where he sings that to Simon Peter, and he's talking about how he used to be part of like a choir. It reminds me a lot of that sort of musicality there. Really interesting.
I think it's ready.
I love that that kept this take in particular. His voice is like just barely getting out the words, but he says, "I think it's ready," and he's just saying, how moved he was by it. Obviously, again, David being a very like touchy-feely, creative, sort of guy. What did you guys think about this section in particular? If it is David during this time, I think it holds so much more weight and understanding of foreshadowing of who he's going to be. This is David right before his downfall, if we think about it that way. And that is really interesting to think about, and the implications that could have for what the storytelling is like for this episode entirely. I love how they use the psalm and David and the choir and the choir masters to kind of talk through this section. Very, very cool. And then, of course, the lineup later on, which we're going to talk about in a later section with Simon and Eden, the lineup of talking about the waters and how Simon, eventually walks on the water and all of that stuff. Like, man, really, really, really good for sure. And, very, very strong storytelling there. So, really, really glad we got this part. Love David, one of my favorite biblical characters. So, yeah. Thank you so much for checking out this video. This is actually a small portion of a much larger live stream that we did for our patrons. And if you want to check out that entire live stream, you can go over to our Patreon at patreon.com/thesnipelife. This is the best way by far to help support us in this ministry and to see what we're doing. We're actually in Israel right now, and you guys can see a ton of extra content that we're only posting on our Patreon. And we'd love for you to be over there so that we can have some conversation and just chat with you guys, get to know you a little bit. Anyway, if you want to sign up for that, we'd love to have you over there, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.